Hello everyone, my name is Andrei Ustuzhanin, and in this lecture I'm going to cover some of the basic aspects, introductory part of supervised machine learning. So we start with a linear regression, then we looked at more complicated models that allow to use linear models for classification of different kinds of objects, and then we evaluate different properties of such models. In this episode, we're going to cover supervised learning approaches. As we saw in the introductory lecture, you can split machine learning algorithms into families of supervised, unsupervised, and reinforcement learning. So supervised is one of the broadest among all the others, and we're going to look at the general setup, which includes both regression and classification problems. So, in supervised learning, we have a set of objects that usually denoted by letter X. And we have a set of targets that is denoted by Y, and we imply that there is a mapping between two sets. It is not necessarily deterministic mapping, it could be stochastic as well, but anyway, we assume that it exists. And the data set D, it consists of objects and targets, X and Y. And the goal of the supervised learning problem is to find the approximate F given D. So we want to be able to recover targets from objects. Those examples give you a little better intuition how it works. So in case of classification of images of flowers, one might be interested in identifying species, and every flower is described by certain properties like length and width of sepals and petals. Or, for example, if we talk about spam filtering, the objects are emails or a sequence of characters, and target would be binary label like spam or not spam. Or if we want to be able to recognize the captures, the input would be the images or vector of pixel of brightness level, and target would be a sequence of characters of those funny inscriptions. In particle physics, of course, a popular application for such methods includes particle identification. So we want to infer the type of particles, electron, muons, or protons, or whatever, based on the properties that we get from the detector. So it could be track parameters, its curvature, its angle, etc. Or it could be energy deposition in the colorimeter. So how do you usually describe your set of objects? And one assumption is that you can use so-called features. It is properties that you can store as numbers or as strings, so as kind of unitary elements. And assumption is that you can describe those features as a vector of the same length for all elements of your set of objects. And then you can write your set of objects as a matrix. So you have features along the horizontal, features along the horizontal axis and objects along the vertical axis. And using such matrices, you can naturally apply many different algorithms to approximate the targets that you have at hand. Here is the example of iris dataset. We have just 4 features, which are sepal length, sepal width, petal length, petal width. And for every set of feature, we would have a kind of label, which is a class of the iris flower. So feature could be of different kind. It could be a numeric feature that allows comparison of values between two different instances. Or it could be categorical feature. In some cases, you cannot compare them directly, like different colors or different cities or type of particle. Or sometimes you can compare those in general. So it could be like level of education, or it could be particle passing loose, medium, or tight selection criteria, or it could be age category of a human. Or the feature could be binary element, which contains just true or false value, or that are represented by 0 or 1 or -1 or +1. So, and given these settings in terms of data set that you can represent as matrix and as a vector of targets, you ask yourself, how do you find approximation that transforms from the features to targets? And here comes the definition of algorithm. So it is a procedure that is able, given a dataset D, to return an approximation f hat that is as close as possible to the true dependence f that we assume exists between x and y. So here is an example of such an algorithm. This is called k-nearest neighbors. Idea behind this algorithm is that close objects should have similar properties, and target is one of the properties. So if we have a training sample of something distributed in our space X, and we look at k closest by some metric or feature space of the feature space objects in the dataset, and just average targets of those nearest neighbors. So mathematically speaking, it produces approximation function like this. So it is a very simple approach that doesn't have any training parameters besides like hyperparameter, which is k. And here is the example of application of this algorithm to a regression problem. In this case, we have a space X, which is one-dimensional thing. And if you want to identify value for given X, you look at neighbors. So you find, a neighbor here, and you find a neighbor here. So two neighbors, and you just average its labels. And in the result, as a result, you get this orange curve that approximates ground truth relation, which is a sign function between x and y. And you see it behaves quite okay, given the training sample of 50 points. And if you increase number of training points, you can see that the accuracy of the approximation becomes much better. So this orange curve almost exactly follows the sine function. The same idea can be applied to a classification setting. So in that example, we have two-dimensional plane that represents two features of our X space, X1 and X2. And in this example, we want to assign a color of every point to one of the two classes, either blue or orange. And it works exactly as I mentioned before. So we pick a random point in this plane, and we find two closest neighbors, and we average its color. And for the case when we have to look at just one neighbor, you see that you can expect very strange shapes to appear, which do not necessarily have a physical meaning. And if we increase number of neighbors, in this case it is equal to 10, the boundary line becomes much more smoother. So how do you quantitatively assess the quality of your algorithm? For that purpose, we introduce loss function. So it is a function that tells how bad the algorithm approximates the true mapping function. And so it is usually denoted as L between ground truth labels and predicted labels. And if we want to find the optimal f hat, it means that we want to find such f hat that minimizes this loss function. Or in other terms, we can rewrite finding f as the following formula, which is here E is expectancy of the values of loss over the dataset D. And examples of loss function, we can find many. We'll talk about those later. For different cases, different loss functions work best. But a simple example could be a squared error. So here is a linear regression in 2 dimensions. You have these blue dots, and you want to find a solution as a linear combination of input features. So you search for the solution in the form of a matrix W in vector W of d-dimensional space and a Bayes term B. So the loss function could be written in the following way. So it is a L2 norm, or distance between ground truth labels and predicted labels, squared and averaged over a number of points in your dataset. So the idea is that you can approximate given points quite accurately. The problem that you may encounter is that such approximation may not behave as we expected in all the points in our space of features. And to mitigate this issue, people usually pick 2 data sets that are independently sampled from our distribution. So we introduce so-called training and testing dataset. And what we might be interested in while training our formula on a training sample, and we record how loss function goes down during the iterations of the training or during the growth of the model complexity. The loss function on the test sample, which is not shown to the algorithm, goes down as well up to a certain point, and then it starts to grow because the formula becomes a little bit overfit, like in this example. We'll talk about this later. Just for the moment, I would like to remember this intuition that there is a kind of a sweet spot between the quality of your model going down and going up on independent, unseen sample. And usually when we want to finish training of our model, we want to stop it somewhere in this sweet spot. That's all I wanted to mention in this episode. So we introduced supervised machine learning settings that are expected to build approximation the true dependence between x and y sets. And x are represented by features. Y can also be of different kind depending on the problem that you're trying to solve. And machine learning algorithms can be defined as expected risk minimization task that usually minimize some kind of loss. And to verify that your loss is really low on the data that you haven't seen, so to verify that your model generalize nicely, you use an independent test data sample for checking. So this is mostly it. A small chunk of food of thought is a question: how can linear regression model be used to feed nth degree polynomial function? This is one question, and another question is find the model of lowest complexity among the ones presented on this slide. So thank you very much, and see you in a second at the second episode.